Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. I'm just going to bring up our audience, make sure this is streaming live. I believe we is live. Let me just... Right, all right. What is going on, people? I take it you can hear me loud and clear. Right, so it says, right, I'll just bring up the comment section, see that the audio is coming through. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Got some people. Right, guys, if you can hear me, audio is good. Shukran, marhaban bikum. Allah bless you all. Right, people. We have with us tonight the esteemed guest. I'm going to bring up the profile in front of you. You have right there. Tonight's guest is Shaykh Nabeel Hussain, who is from California, USA, somebody that has dedicated much of his life to the Quran, studying it, learning, memorizing, and then teaching it. And let me bring up the the Noor blessed face whilst we are waiting. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban. You
Wa
are
alaikum assalam.
live.
Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm just going to check that
It's an
the
honor for me.
audio is loud and clear, and that you can, because in the past sometimes there's been a discrepancy between my audio and that of the esteemed guest, yourself. Right. So I take it that
Am I
the
coming through?
loud and clear with all that noor, Sheikh, with all your noor. Allah, Allah. So people,
Bouncing off your.
guys, let me just right. Oh, did I just hear some? I think I just heard an echo. Right. I hope not. Let's so let me just introduce for us tonight Shaykh Nabeel Hussain, who from a very young age has dedicated his life to not only memorizing but studying the Quran around the Bay Area of the great United States. Wah, and then set upon quite an adventurous path, really, coming across great mashayikh, and we'll go into that. All of, or many of whom inspired him with many different brilliant features of the Quran, and leading him to set up his own sites and institutions where he teaches and explores rich and diverse topics and themes within the Quran today, inspiring many other people. So, Sheikh Nabeel, right. Firstly, once I know it's been quite a, it's been quite a what shall we say, an epic in having this, because I know we've been back and forth and a lot has been going on.
Yeah,
So
it's a long
shukran.
time in the making.
Yeah, so shukran once again. Let's get right to your journey, yaar. So as a young person, you've been you found yourself on the path of Kitabullah and the Quran. Talk to us a bit about this in your glorious words.
Yeah. Bismillah ar-Rahim. So my life within this family, my mother has always wanted us to do hifz, her boys, and I'm three brothers. So when we moved to America from Pakistan when I was 8, from Abu Dhabi actually, Abu Dhabi and Pakistan, we moved to America, and we were 8, and we moved to Southern California, and we moved to Southern California, and this is 2002, and there my mother has this wish that her children go to hifz. They go to the hifz program, and
Okay.
she literally in that time just searches on Google Hifz programs,
Yeah.
and we find in North Cal, so this is like 6 hours north,
Yeah.
that there is a Hifz program, and we then make that move. And when we move there, my brother, who's 8 years older than me, and I am around 8 years old, so I'm 8, he's 16. So
What's his name?
his name is Waqas.
Waqas.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we reach um, this city of Fremont. It's like 30 minutes from San Francisco,
Yeah.
and we're here. And now when I've arrived, the goal was for me to do Hifz, and I am a bit young for Hifz. And around that time, so we're waiting for me to enter Hifz. My elder brother, he gained an affinity towards the Hifz school, and he wants to join in. And now he is older than the age. So now here we are. I am younger to enter, and he's older than the age. But he really wants to enter. So my mom and him, they really push forward, and then the shuyukh there, my Shaykh Mufti Mudassir from Fremont, they work together, and they're like, you know what? He's got the skills. Let's bring him in. And mashallah, he enters, and then within 3 years he completes. And during that time, I also enter. But the subhanallah, the way Allah works, the goal was for me to do hifz, then my mom got a buy one get one free situation, and then both of us complete. And my brother, the reason I'm bringing him up is he was someone that was, when I look at you, I remember him a lot. He was someone who was very authentic in who he was, and because we didn't come from a Hifz family, we didn't come from a shuyukh family. We're just
I see.
like what anyone would consider irregular, you know. And he is now someone entering Hifz, so he is very fashionable. He is very, he has his interest in the arts and the entertainment and all of that. So here he is, and for a lot of people that became who were considering to put their children into Hifz, they saw him as this bright light in the sense of, oh, I can put my child into Hifz and into Deen studies, and they're going to come out all right, right? They're not going to forget the world, and they are going to have this connection. So
There's
he
hope.
became,
There's
yes,
hope.
and there are many, mashallah, like shuyukh now, obviously, many years from now, and that have become shuyukh. And their starting point was their parents looking at my brother and wanting to put their own children into Hifz.
Oh,
So
wow.
now, what happened with me, right? So I am now in Hifz. I'm around 14 years old, and my brother, he is 22. And around this time, my brother, he gets in a car accident in Pakistan, and he passes away.
Inna
And this was
lillahi wa inna
a
ilayhi raji'un.
and this was a huge shocker for our entire family. But this is where I think like the torch passes on, and it's a pivotal part of my story because
Wow.
now here I am in the middle of Hifz, and I remember I was 15 juz in. I was, because we do 10 juz from the back and then we start from
And
the
how,
front.
how, how old are you at this time?
I am 14 years old.
14. And your brother, he's passed away in this tragic accident. May Allah bless his afterlife and even many years on, but still bless your family and grant your family ease. So you're a teenager at this time.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And this unquestionably the kind of tragic trauma, um, and finding yourself. I mean, you already said you looked up to him in this way. This has a pivotal impact on you, does it?
It does. So it
Mm,
has a pivotal impact in two ways, I would say. We'll leave the second part for when it comes in. But
sure.
the first part is obviously just in my general life. Here I am in the middle of my Hifz, 15 juz in, and I am 14, so I'm relatively young to make any decisions. But
Of
now
course.
life has shifted me around. Um, and at this point, I am doing my Hifz, and the Hifz program that we're in, their focus is just the Hifz part, right? We're not delving into the Quran or the understanding of it.
Mm,
But around this time, I'm really beginning to question, why am I doing Hifz in the first place, right? All of this has happened in life. This one is really
yeah.
hard work. It's really tiring. And it's around this time that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He opens up ways. And that year, the 2009 year, it was the golden year or era of traveling courses. That Al-Maghrib and Nu'man Ali Khan and Sam Sharif and all of these people. They're all everywhere, and they
Ah,
start approaching. They're in my city, and this is the time when they're not as popular as they are now. So
right.
you could step up, and there's a lot of talking period with them,
There
and some
was
of them
there,
actually
there was something special about that time, though.
it was.
Yeah.
I would
Mm,
say it's pre-short term content. I think it was a
yeah.
time when you were digesting long-term learning a lot.
And I think the huge celebritydom hadn't been massively established. I mean, it was clearly there, but just it was still developing in some way, and therefore making certain people more accessible, making certain interactions more natural. It,
Yeah,
yeah. But yeah, you were saying,
yeah, definitely. It was a time where you were getting this close connection with these people, and they were more human than celebrities. And I mean, immense respect for them still.
of
But
course,
you're getting this closeness with them, so it's more real. And many of the shuyukh were impacting this 14-year-old kid, right, helping him out. And one of the biggest things that was happening at this point was the mosque or the masjid that I'm doing my hifz is a Deobandi and it's a Tablighi masjid, right? So they have a certain way of thinking, and al-Maghrib and all of these other groups have a different way of thinking.
yeah,
Um, and now and different enough for where fingers are pointed at each other. But when you are someone trying to learn, right, and you're a kid, especially, you're just going for whatever's calling you more. So I'm at this point where I'm going to this other mosque where these traveling courses are coming in, and I'm doing these courses which have a very different viewpoint than the masjid that I'm doing my hifz. So I'm going back and forth, and the Bay Area, right, the San Francisco area is one of the most diverse places. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we have, Zaytuna here. We have,
ah,
we have.
blessed. It's a
It's a
blessed
very
area,
blessed.
yeah.
You'll find a huge following of each thought
Mm,
around you, right? And especially when you're going in Ramadan, you're like every other day you are digesting different viewpoints. If you choose to, if you choose not to, then you can be just in your own bubble. But regardless, I am going back and forth, and when I'm coming back to my area, it's like, oh, Nabeel is now going to study, with the other people, with the other group, and it is for me that's also bringing up like, okay, because now you still have to choosing like, okay, who am I going? It's like a sports team, right? Which one am
yeah.
I going to go with? But regardless, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, He's allowed me to study more and more and more, and then for the next 6 years, I am getting deep into these studies, these ulum al-Quran, ulum al-Hadith, and getting my fiqh and all of these things in from both aspects. I'm getting the Deobandi take where I am doing my
Mm,
hifz, and I'm also getting the other perspective from the Salafi group where I am getting that
yeah.
knowledge.
There was you studied Sharia and kind of fiqh, and was it Mufti Mullah or something, or Mufti?
Yeah, it's called Sharia Academy. It was
Right. Okay.
Yusuf Mullah. I think he was in
Yeah.
Canada.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was getting a lot of these diverse thoughts coming in, which
Hmm.
become really crucial because it starts at a certain point when you are getting all of these different viewpoints coming in,
Yeah.
which can be very different. You start having to zoom out a little bit,
Of
and you
course.
start having this. Your brain goes on this greatest common factor, right? And you start to figure out, okay, what is going on, and that's what leads to, after that 2014 era is when I start realizing that I'm getting all of these different viewpoints coming in, right? The fragment ayat that each is using for their arguments, but I have not read the Quran myself, right? I have not read the Quran cover to cover. Like the way, and I was a kid growing up as a reader who's reading books. I
Hmm.
know what reading a book feels like. Like I know that if you were to ask me what's at the beginning of this book, what's at the end of this book, what's in the middle of this book, I can tell you, right? There's a flow. But I realize that I don't have that flow when it comes to the Quran. Like I'm very knowledgeable or like fairly knowledgeable about the intricacies, that can be used with particular ahadith and particular ayat. But if
Hmm.
you were to ask me like a book, then I wouldn't be able to have that map in my head.
I
And
see.
that is when I get deeper into, let me just like put a little mute for a second
Yeah.
and let me go through this. And what happens there is that, in a nutshell, when I go through the Quran, having gone through all of this fiqh,
Yeah.
which is,
No, it's
you
that
describe that.
it is there are certain self-evident truths that themselves cannot be proven. So it's kind of he's highlighting that mathematics, even though it's seen as complete, but it's
Conclusions start becoming hard coded. Start becoming cemented in our study of Islam.
um
You can hear me all right?
yep, yeah, I can hear you. So what I've done is I've just um refreshed the stream, so it should be going through now once again. I just want to make sure that it's let me just check the YouTube should be picking it up. It does say excellent condition connection. So hopefully it's just give it 2 seconds to it's feeding it through. And are we there? Right, it should be. So right, I take it it's going through fine. So okay, let's yep, sorry. Let's resume. And if there's any issues, I'll give you a shout. But yeah, you were saying, yep. So yeah, you've sorry, please, yeah, please proceed.
Yeah, I was saying that the conclusions that we often see, they start getting cemented in to our study. So we'll say, oh, this thing is haram. So our haram list starts increasing, and our halal list starts increasing, and they become cemented. So when we think Islam, we think of these conclusions, right? So we'll begin with, oh, certain things are just haram. Your
Yeah,
eyebrows, doing your eyebrows are haram. Music is haram. Your various things. I often think of these two because that's a given for a lot of people. For a lot of people, you just start off with that. So when you go into the Quran, you start expecting these to be in the Quran,
yeah.
and you
S-
don't find them.
And this way of thinking, this kind of spirit towards the Quran, is this inspired by someone, one of the mashayikh? Is this just you? Is this because where is this coming from? This kind of inquisitory outlook towards the Quran, trying to be somewhat more objective and unbiased. That's what it sounds like. It's trying to be
Yeah.
yeah. So where is that coming from? Is it you? Is it inspired from someone else?
I think
Because
it's a
you've
combination of first.
the reason I'm saying is because you've mentioned all these names that you're going between, and there's all these mashayikh, and so I'm just curious.
Yes, I think the combination is of me when I take that journey of, okay, let me just go through the Quran cover to cover. Let me just shower in it. Let me see what's happening, what the tone is, what's going on inside of this Quran. I start discovering, Allah's anger towards certain characteristics, and Allah's happiness with certain characteristics, and you're learning a lot about Allah. And then, right, I mean, you could just take the Surah Baqarah. I mean, in a few pages you're in, and then you have the story of the cow, right? Like asking questions about the cow. That page, when we're doing hifz or practicing, because it does have repeating words, but you're looking at that, and there is this clear, like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is um, he's getting angry at a certain characteristic that the Bani Israel are treating Musa alayhi salam with, right? So
Hmm.
that tells you something about Allah, and then his relationship with fiqh and how we approach it. And it's put a spark in my head.
Hmm.
But then I guess for any idea that you get, you don't want to be crazy. So then you start finding that, am I the only one who's thinking this way? Right? It's all in my head. And then you discover people. And I think for me, discovering someone like Sheikh Akram Nadwi, for example, who you wouldn't think would be under that category, but just going through his classes, I remember I signed up for his philosophy class and logic, and just his approach and just his approach with dealing with the Quran, and then what really struck me was with certain shuyukh, they had this um, humility when it came to the book of Allah, where, and I'm not saying not everyone does, but there's just this particular characteristic where they see it and they're like, you know what, this is a hard one for me because it's not present, yet I cling on to this. I would see that a lot with Shaykh Nabeel, where you could see, and even in this book, I don't know if what is it, if the oceans were ink, where that journalist spends a year with him. I don't know if you've heard of this book. Yeah, and in that book, you notice the same thing where he is himself is like, okay, I have these conclusions in my head, but it's very hard for me to find that in the book of Allah, even though it's cemented in my head. Seeing that shuyukh were having this, I think it's the same time I discovered you as well. Sheikh Jawed, Sheikh Jawed Ghamdi was a big one in that sense, and particularly about him and his name in traditional circles becomes so taboo because of this, his viewpoints, and it becomes like the way he's often talked about in those circles, in traditional circles, is that he does not know what he's talking about, right?
Oh wow! Is that the impression that you feel was historically there, or you feel this still persists to some extent today?
Oh, I think with his name it still persists.
Oh, does
if you're in a traditional circle and you bring out his name, it will put your entire ilm into question for a lot of these groups, because it's just like, oh, you subscribe to that team, that must mean you're against everything in our team.
Oh wow!
And
because here's me thinking. Here's me thinking that Allama Javed Ghamdi Saab is now, as of, let's say, the last 3-4 years, I'm assuming, this is me assuming, that he's become now like almost pretty much like a household name, a staple name, and he has become quite accepted as like he's kind of squeezed on into what is the mainstream, even if people don't agree with him, but he's also one of the people there. The amount of TV interviews he's done sometimes and been called on alongside great, big senior muftis. And so I would have thought people now are like, oh, Ghamdi Saab, as in they, but I didn't think they would be that still, it's so taboo. No.
I would still say it's taboo because just hearing his name incites this, oh, he's gotten popular, and you're right, more and more people know his name, but accepting him says a lot about your own, traditional values.
Oh wow.
That is a challenge. So when he came to the Bay Area, and I was still in this phase of figuring out my relationship with Deen, and after having studied, and I went to his program, and in my head, because of this preconceived notion, I was expecting some holes and flaws and all of that. And Dr. Shahzad, who's been on your podcast a couple, he was there too. And I remember I went there, and having gone through the Quran cover to cover, and this relationship with the Quran as like one piece, you can spot when someone knows it or not, right? You can spot when someone has read a book or not. And when his question and answers, now that he's older, he gives very small questions and answers. Back when his hair was more darker, he would have much lengthier answers, but now he just most of his answers are now just like meri kitab mein dekh lo, right? It's right there.
Before Ghamdi Saab would have some of these answers where he would say, what is it? Alhamdulillah ki alif se lekar कि it's a वहाँ की ये से देखकर कहीं भी कुरान में ये नहीं मिलता है. He had these kind of iconic statements that he would use. But yeah, okay.
So going there and really, like, I was having this one-on-one brain sync with this man and realizing, oh, like he gets it. And then you would even notice in the audience that a lot of people, even though they were like, oh yes, he gave, and so there are a lot of people, relationship with him or relationship with you
Mm,
would be one of, oh, look at them trying to make the Deen easy, right?
mm,
But in a realm in which you are reading the Quran, it's, you don't see it as that at all, right? You see it as, oh, look at how seriously they're taking the Quran, right? And that started happening. And I remember just that environment where he was busy, he was talking to people. I think they were having the picture session. And so I had a question to ask him about his 5 categories of haram thing. So he wasn't there, and I asked Shahzad Salim,
okay.
Dr. Shahzad Salim.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fact that his student was able to give such a complex answer to me,
Mm,
it was just like, oh, there is, um, that was giving me assurance that, oh, like, there is this relationship with the Quran that is an important one that we all need to be having, because if, basically, if two minds can, think alike, there, what is the force, what is the
mm,
electricity there? And I've noticed, even in my conversations with you and we had regarding the miracles, um, it's, we were able to have that, electric connection because there was that sync, and that sync is what I'm talking
mm,
about. There's something
mm.
about the Quran that if more and more people, I believe, were having this cover to cover connection, you would have more syncing happening. And I
Yeah.
think what I noticed is that sync is sometimes lost because two people who are debating about Islam have not read the book.
You mean that? So what you're saying, Sheikh, is that the souls must be connected. Ah, yeah. Wow, absolutely, absolutely. Al-arwah junudun mujannada. That's the souls are connected. There is something very special about certain people, amongst them Ghamdi Saab and even Ustad Noman Ali Khan and other people, that they, I just mean, these people are obviously in our time, but there's obviously countless other people that, you see, they put this spotlight back on the Quran. And you had that the centrality of the Quran. They spoke of this and championed this concept. And you have other people, obviously, you have people in the Arab world as well, Sheikh Adnan Ibrahim,
Right.
and you'll have obviously other. I'm not saying it's exclusive to these people. I'm just giving some names as an example. But because that is a theme that was almost, and it's not that I think all Muslims unquestionably love the Quran, but de facto, without realizing it, the Quran had taken a back position.
Yeah.
It was something that was just, it had been relocated to and relegated to a to a non-primary
Yeah.
space. So everything now just revolved around whether for some people it's fatawa, for some people it's something else, for some people it's something. And then the Quran is there in the background just to, sure, they wouldn't say it like that. Maybe they're not
Yeah.
even aware of it like that. Maybe they've never even thought about it. It's such a given for them. But these discussions in the last decade that we saw emerging, that were saying, no, the Quran must always be primary, it must always be. And I take it that's something that's also captivated you, and you've gone on to really
Yeah.
express this argument as well, isn't it? So talk to us a bit about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think now, ultimately, having now entered, like, let me treat this Quran as this the one that I've memorized, right? And I've been growing up around this culture of memorizing this Quran. Let me connect with this, right, as it
Yeah.
is. And that is where I start really discovering this personality of Allah, right? This personality of God, which I know it has a very mystic sounding phrase, but it is something that I started noticing, like, I mean, just you start off in Surah Fatiha, right? And you have this maghdub, right? غير المغضوب عليهم. Like, you're
Mm.
having this, like, oh, that there is, so Allah gets angry, right? So Allah, and then you go on to the Quran, there's Allah's rida, there's Allah getting disappointed in these people, there's Allah being happy with these people, right? And things like that throughout the Quran, it was a very different discussion. And having grown up in both in the Salafi spectrum and the Sufi spectrum, right? And the various, it was this discussion that I was seeing in the Quran, and that's what I meant. I was discovering things I didn't expect it to be there, right? And these, every single thing that was happening in the Quran, I just kept asking, why is he bringing it in, right?
Mm.
Why is he bringing in the story of, why is he bringing in the story of Sulaiman, who is like this, peak of wealth? He's literally saying, right, "Utina min kulli shay." We've been given everything. He's bringing him in, but then he's not, like, in Surah Sad, you have Sulaiman right next to Ayub, right? He's right, like, that is just, why is he bringing in the wealthiest person, and then the other person, everything is taken away? Like, he's bringing in, and it's teaching us about what, there's this famous thing in the Bible, that line, right, that a rich man will never enter heaven until he
Yeah.
passes through the eye of the,
Eye of a
right,
needle. Mm-hmm.
eye of the needle, until a camel
Until
passes
a
the eye of the
camel, yeah,
needle.
yeah.
And that same phrasing, it comes in the Quran,
No.
right? But it doesn't say rich man. It says the arrogant, right? The arrogant will not pass it, right, until the camel
Yeah.
passes the eye of the needle, because
حتى يلج الجمل ثم الخياط. And that's zeroing in more on the precise factor, because rich,
of what exactly?
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Rich
So
isn't a
these
bad
things,
thing.
so it's like, what I'm trying to say is, when you're going through the Quran, you're learning about Allah and what He likes and what He dislikes. And the idea of the Quran is that if I drop you in, like, 2050 Germany, like a place that you're not used to, right? 2050 Beijing, you will be able to understand what will make Allah happy here, what will make Allah angry here, right? And that's what I really see in the Quran is this. That's the first thing I started seeing in the Quran. And the
Yeah.
second thing is just this relationship that Allah, these human emotional concepts that Allah is mentioning, right? I talked about, like, how Ibrahim, when he talks about Ibrahim alayhi salam, he is, he says, Inna Ibrahim la awahun halim, Inna Ibrahim la awahun munib, right? Awah, and he's saying that this Ibrahim is this, he has a soft heart, he's this compassionate being. And he does it in very interesting spots. He does it, one where yujadiluna fi qawmi Lut, right? Where
Okay.
there's a story of Ibrahim, who he's pleading to Allah for the Qawm Lut. And in the
Yeah.
Bible, it goes into a much deeper conversation where he's saying that, oh God, if there is 50 people in the city who are good, spare the
Yeah.
city. And then Allah says there's no 50 people. And then he says, is there 40 people? There's 30 people? There's 20 people? There's 10 people? There's one person?
Yeah.
And and so Allah says, no, this city is unsavable, but Ibrahim has a very soft heart. He compliments his heart, even though he's going to do away with Qawm Lut. And in another
Yeah.
place, we know the story of Ibrahim, who ever since he leaves his father, he's constantly always making dua for his dad, who is, this certified kafir. Until that point, he's not certified, but he is, making dua for his father, who's like, I hope he comes back. He's doing istighfar for him. And then Allah, at one point, he says, Ibrahim, he's not going to be saved. But he once again compliments Ibrahim, that Ibrahim has this soft heart. And
Wow. And it's somebody excessively, in one of the ways of looking at it, somebody's excessively kind of, it's almost like an onomatopoeia, like, oh, like, oh, wow. That's also one way of, people adding to the kind of linguistic meaning.
yeah,
Somebody that has this, oh, it's, oh, wow. Because it's really coming from ah, and the wow is obviously the missing letter being brought back. That, oh, wow. Yeah.
and then even, like, just take the story of where he does the, he makes that feast for the angels that come. Why is Allah mentioning these points, and these very human points, right? And one of my favorite ones is وَأَصْبَحَ فُؤَادُ أُمِّ مُوسَى فَارِغًا, where when Musa's mother puts Musa in the basket,
Hmm.
Allah, the way He describes the feeling of the mother is that point, right? As I mentioned, like having seen my brother pass away and my mom, and the obviously the feelings that she had, the way He describes that feeling, or the way He describes the feeling of Yaqub when he loses Yusuf, it's just so phenomenal that Allah is, you know, He is really getting the human experience, obviously because He's the creator, but as a reader, you're sometimes when we get into religious discussions, we forget about that realm, and Allah keeps bringing those points in, and it's like in Surah Rahman, you have يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان, right? They used to take out pearls and rubies, which
Oh.
is like those in a religious sense. When you get into it, like the religion is all about sacrifice, and Allah loves that. But then you see Allah Himself talking about these things that would be considered frivolous to a human or to a saintly mind, but to Him, it's important enough to be discussing.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah, because the imagery also, يُحَلَّوْنَ فِيهَا عَسَاوِرَ, that these bracelets min dhahab, that these golden bracelets
yeah,
these men are wearing, and this is all an incentivization. It's there to, but you're right. If there's a uh, like an ontology that's saying, well, isn't the deen all meant to be about an asceticism, a
yeah,
distancing from dunya or from jewelry or from beauty or from, then people naturally wouldn't be enticed to those things because they would be
yeah,
a, yeah. So it's quite a an interesting balancing that is taking place.
yeah. And it's like all of these things, which is what I was saying. You weren't, if you come in with that mindset of you've already figured out what the deen is about. The deen is about, as you said, asceticism, or the deen is about, following the law. You come with all of these perspectives, and you come into this, but you're finding Allah talk about, and especially second juz, right? Surah Baqarah, second juz. It is constantly Allah mentioning like exception to rules, right? So you'll have Ramadan, and then he'll be like, you can have relations at night, or you're going to Umrah, but then if you have your hair, right? If you have a sickness, then you can do this, and if you're fasting, and if you can't do it, then do this, right? It's just really challenging
Yeah.
your perspective. Like the Quran is just like it really stimulates your mind, and
Hmm.
it gets you to think the way Allah wants you to think. Is what I started noticing, and specifically this part where in the first 10 juz, and this is where I think it has the biggest ramifications for our understanding of Deen, um, where the first 10 juz, it's pretty much Allah speaking to Bani Israel like directly, like
Mm.
for a vast majority of the parts. And we're on the, like, we as in the Muhammadans who are coming in right after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? We're on the side, and he's having these straight on discussions with them. Yeah, Bani Israel, look how you would do this when you were given a law, or look how you did this, and look, and it feels like he's training the new generation on what to do with your fiqh, what to do with your, right?
Yeah.
And it's like this, it's an, if this is the final book of God, it's an amazing, two things about these are amazing, right? One is that he's kept the previous uh, Ahlul Kitab completely intact enough for it to be a case study
Hmm.
for us, which is profound, right? So, for example, when he says that they say that the fire is only going to touch us for a few days, right? For the
Okay.
for the Jews, and you search that up today, that the rabbi's relationship with heaven and hell, and they're pretty much still saying the same thing, right? You
Mm.
ask them about heaven and hell, and they give a blurry answer. And
Mm.
it's amazing how he's kept that intact as a case study for the future. And then we still have that critique memorized by millions.
Ah, right. Okay, that's fascinating. I never thought of it from that perspective. So, yeah, because there is an entire branch really of Judaism that is in a suspended state when it comes to the akhirah, and they don't really they disengage mostly from the topic categorically, and they don't deny, but they don't clearly affirm it,
Yeah,
and they, yeah, so
there
it's,
is like a blur to
yeah,
it.
okay.
And it's fascinating to me
Mhm.
that it's, from a point of view of a God who is he's ultimately powerful. It's like it's protected. Like these case studies are protected, and the critique is also protected. It's you know what I'm saying? It's fascinating that you have Christianity thriving, you have Judaism thriving, and then you have this book that is in one book critiquing points of views, massive point of views. And you're going through, as I was mentioning, that you are going through how it's critiquing um, like an usul al-fiqh or a way of them deriving fiqh in Judaism and in Christianity, and he's saying, you know, bring your book, let's take a look at it. That whole discussion is fascinating
And
because it dictates how we're going to study the Deen.
I was going to say that so much of the first portion having this direct um, kind of dialogical discourse with Bani Israel. And yeah, and as so, if one was to ask, well, why so much of it, as opposed to a few verses in one surah
Yeah,
or another? What are your
yeah.
thoughts on this? Because that is a fascinating question.
It is a lot, right? It's
Yeah.
and when you're doing hifz, and one of the things about doing hifz that is I'm eternally grateful for is that you start noticing patterns,
Mm.
right? Especially when you're getting ready for Taraweeh. You have to really get those patterns down, otherwise you're gonna mess up in public, right? But you have to get your Ya Bani Israel is coming at the start, Ya Bani Israel is coming later. So you start noticing these patterns that are specific to surahs internally. It's really fascinating that I think everyone has the opportunity to get into. You start feeling the Quran, you start you're entering into the patterns.
Mm.
And like you just mentioned, like Bani Israel, they're having this non-stop discussion and and pretty heavy verses, right? And not just critiques but also praise. At the beginning of the seventh juz, وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ تَرَى أَعْيُنَهُمْ تَفِيضُ مِنَ الدَّمْعِ. He's praising how you will see that some from the Ahlul Kitab, when they hear the truth, tears will flow down their faces. And right before that page, you have لُعِنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل, where he's saying that, you know, the Bani Israel, or the elites from them, were cursed, right, on the tongues of Dawood and Isa. And
Mm.
it, to me, really seems like he is really getting this new generation, right, ready for now, because I sent the last people books, a revelation, and they went a certain direction with it. So I send them, I send them revelation through Torah, and then they went in a certain direction. And then I send them, Injil through Isa, right? And when he describes Isa, right, alayhi salam, he says, يعلمه الكتاب والحكمة والتوراة والإنجيل, right? And this is when you look at, and he's such a fascinating, Isa alayhi salam, such a fascinating character, because you see this, his direct, like every prophet is going to their people, but
Mhm.
Isa alayhi salam is directly going to the ulama of Bani Israel, right? You go through Matthew, you go through just the discussions that they're having,
Mm.
and it's the one I recommend to all people. I mean, just the way that Allah says, لُعِنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ عَلَى لِسَانِ دَاوُودَ وَعِيسَى بْنِ مَرْيَمَ, right? That the Bani Israel, the curse, they were cursed, or right, they were heavily critiqued by Dawood and Isa. It's enough for us to go see, okay, what is this thing? And when you open up their own literature, you see just Jesus going to his people and teaching them what it means to a people who have fiqh, which is the most
Yeah.
fascinating part, right? To a people who have ulama. And he's going to them and he's saying that and all of his entire discussion is, where is your relationship with God? You have the rulings, but where is your relationship with God?
A
And
a a spiritual element. With this verse that you said, just how do you see? Because it says, he teaches them يعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة, but also that with Isa, let's say, or even us afterwards, you've got the Torah, the Injil. and then the Quran afterwards. In between, obviously, with Isa, this mention of hikmah as well. But are would you see these as so? These are defined as revelation, yeah,
Yeah.
broadly under the umbrella of revelation.
Hmm.
But in their makeup of
Yeah.
how they in their manifestation, do you see these as entirely distinct? I don't just mean in wording, but in their kind of ontological nature. So the Torah, for example, is often seen or defined as the law.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you look at the Jewish Bible or the Torah, or the, if we're looking at the Tanakh and different things, there's a
Yeah.
lot of rulings and a lot of the actual ontological nature of the book, of the scripture, is very different. Now, if we're taking a look at the Injil, which is often described as the gospel, which is just then defined as good news.
Yeah.
Because one question is, well, what is the actual good news? Well,
Yeah.
what is the actual gospel? Because Jesus came with the gospel. He came with the good news. Well, what is it? Because if we're going through, whether it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, and they're saying, well, and Jesus came upon such and such people, and they said to him, "Oh, teacher would,"
Yeah.
and then he would respond with whether it's going to be Proverbs, or he would ask them questions. So the whole story, the narrative that Jesus came upon a certain people who are like this surely can't be the good news. That's a description of what's happening. Now, one may say, well, the good news is, well, what he responds with. Um, which often is proverbial, and it's in parables, and it's he's explaining to them in these amthila. And then you've got the
Yeah.
nature of the Quran, which is entirely different. Like the Quran is almost like something that is recited. It has a rhythmic force with it.
Yeah.
It creates so so it creates it's not poetry, but it's equally about experience,
Yeah.
and not just simply a reading, like a textbook reading. Just
Yeah.
as a person who, so for example, when you read a a poem, or as Karen Armstrong said, scripture explaining is akin to the its impact is akin to the impact a person has if they are experiencing art. There's there's an experiential element that can't be put into words. Like if I even, and the Quran is not poetry,
Yeah.
but to just say poetry as an approximation that people can understand what the experience is, that if you hear a poem in a certain um, language, English, because it doesn't follow metric kind of styles anymore, it has lost a lot of that. But let's say Arabic or Urdu, many other languages, when there's a poem said, it's not it's not just a sum of the words. Like if I said a poem to you now, it's not the moment you explain that poem to someone, or you explain what it says, you convey the meaning, but it loses the experience. And that's obviously,
Yeah.
the Quran is not poetry, but the Quran has this powerful experiential effect where the words, there is there is a rhythmic force, and they are said in a certain manner, syntactical eloquence to it, that creates an experience, a dhawq, which is more
Yeah.
than just the meaning.
Yeah.
So how would you see? Because here the Quran, when it's referring to, look, there was a Torah, there was an Injil, there,
Yeah.
one may say there was hikmah, there is the Quran. To some people, these are just all seen as books. They were just all a. But we know the very nature of the Jewish Bible is nothing like the nature of the Quran in
Yeah.
its So yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
It's fascinating the way that you were describing the Quran. It in a way that it is very different than, let's just take the Old Testament and New Testament, right? That's the famous division now, right?
Mm.
And we take Old Testament as like the Hebrew part, right? It was pre-Jesus, and then New Testament is post-Jesus, right? We just take that, and we do start off with what you just said, that these two, just by their nature of preservation, which the discussion always that comes up, is that they are this collection of human works, and they say it proudly too, right? You ask them, how is your book preserved? And there's like, oh, this is over, years and years of many different authors, right? 66 different authors are working into this and making this collection, right? That would be the equivalent of us taking our Quran, our ahadith, our seerah, our tafasir, and our proverbs, and our poetry, and putting it into one collection. That is pretty much how the Bible is presented now. Within it, you zoom in and into like the Leviticus area, right? And you start seeing this collection of laws. Don't eat this, 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 this. Don't do this, 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 right? It's a pamphlet of what not to do.
Mm.
And now I do say that there's one interesting concept, because if we're comparing these three, right? There's the Old Testament, New Testament, and
Yeah.
then you have the Quran. And if you have Musa, alayhi salam, you have him ending his mission amongst his people in a way. I mean, they're still lost in the desert, but it's still within his people. He's escaped Egypt. He's technically won, right? He's gained victory in the
Mm.
sense that he's with his people. He's not dying at the hands of the enemy, right?
Hmm.
And the same thing with the Prophet ﷺ. He is now ending his mission amongst the Sahaba. This thing is, ending calmly, in the sense, and I say calmly in the sense that you're able to pass on the revelation in a proper tying up way,
Hmm.
which I think the Prophet ﷺ is able to do. Musa
Of
alayhi
course.
salam is able to do. But there's something about Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, where it doesn't end that way, right? It
Yeah.
ends in running. It ends in, whatever happens on the cross scene.
Mm.
But the whole, I mean, the night before the Judas scene is happening, and then from there on, it's a blur. Biblically, it's a blur.
Yeah.
Quranically, even, right? And it's a blur. Even disciples wise, it's a blur, right? The disciples are like, most of them are not there seeing. So it becomes a blur, and you
Yeah.
don't have enough time to seal up this, and you don't have this time to seal up Injil. And I think from the way that you were describing it, um, the Quran, its rhythmic nature, it really, it seems like in this final revelation, it's now transcended above human efforts of keeping it.
Mm.
Pretty remarkable, right? When you said that there's this, it seems like there's this aura of the Quran that is around, right? It's no
Yeah.
longer books, and books was a huge part of keeping. Obviously, the oral tradition in the Hebrew, but they also had a tradition of writing a lot.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
now it's no longer the final revelation that I am sending down is now is going to be kept with, it's going to be kept protected in
Yeah.
the air,
And it
right?
is
Free.
Quran. It is a reciting, a recital.
Yeah,
It is something that is recited. It's not just a reading. You see, because like you
yeah,
have in psychology and you have in Gestalt psychology, that there are certain things that the whole is great, like the whole of something is greater than the simple sum of its parts. Like I take,
exactly.
like I take something and it's, you see, if I just place them as independent elements, sure, you understand them, but as a collective, they have an experience, and this is, and obviously, and the reason I was saying poetry as an example is just because most people can't understand the Quran. Most Muslims don't
Yeah,
understand it, so they're just hearing the experience through a second person experience. So, as a poor approximation, one could explain, well, akin to the expression of, as Karen Armstrong says, the expression of art, scripture is akin to that, or even when people hear in certain languages a poem, for example, Let's say we take something of, I don't know, of Ghalib, or of, just as an example for what it makes people experience. I don't know, let's say Ghalib says, माना के तगाफुल ना करोगे लेकिन खाक हो जाएंगे हम तुमको खबर होने तक. Now, that, he's saying that I accept that you're not going to intentionally ignore me or neglect me, but by the time you do cast your attention on me, I would have become dust. Now, this now there's the explaining of it, the words, like I say, well, this is what the person is saying, and then there's the actual experiencing what's being said, which is greater than the sum of its parts. It's greater than the individual words. Or if there's a poem, I think I've read it before, that speaking of death, that let's say maut ek arsae behoshi hai, that that death itself is an era of unconsciousness. That maut ek arsae behoshi hai, yani hosh ud jayenge hosh aane tak. And that, you see, now this is like a vault, like almost a plot twist. What is being said in the second, that you are seeing that, well, that death is an era of unconsciousness. That hosh ud jayenge hosh aane tak. That meaning that you will lose all sense of what is happening until until you finally come to your senses. But when you explain it, it doesn't seem to capture the spirit of it. Now,
I can see the frustration in you.
Yeah, in trying to explain it. Yeah. But even if, let's say, somebody premeditated and they, not off the cuff, they actually translated, but it doesn't capture it. And this is poetry, and obviously Ta'ala Allah, and the Quran is something so exclusive. Now, it has this style. It provokes. It rhymes. So Allah is saying, "Inna maw'idakum as-subh." That your meeting time, your appointment is subh.
Yeah.
Alaysa subhu biqarib?
It has that same tone in which you said it in.
Yeah, it has that. Yeah, that is exactly the, your appointment is dawn. Oh, is dawn not near? But it doesn't, when you hear the actual, it evokes this experiential awe that is more than just the words.
Yeah.
There is a spirit, an aura, an awe that is with it, that is kind of greater than the sum of its parts. And yeah.
Do you also find it, from everything that you're saying, do you find it interesting how it is also accessible in its nature, in the sense of, if you look at the vocabulary of the Quran, right, it is very, he is repeating a lot of words. He is repeating, phrasings are a lot repeated. You'll have a same phrasing that is repeated in another place, but it's going to have a different context. Because, I'm just saying rhythmic context when it's around a certain place. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, there seems to be it's complex, but it's still accessible. Like, it keeps pointing out how clear we are, how clearly we've written this, right? It's, what do you think about that? What do you think about the fact that it's this immense, and like you just said,
you see, I see
it has this.
To me, the repetition in the Quran, or whether that's thematic or in terms of themes, or whether that's in terms of wording and expression, I think this in many ways mirrors the tabi'ah of insan. We are our entire life in many ways is repetitive. It's
Yeah.
the ultimately, when you zoom out, the themes in life that we are experiencing are repetitive, albeit in a different expression. Whether it's going
Yeah.
to be themes of complexity, themes of struggle, themes of joy, themes of
Yeah.
interactions, relationships.
We're
It
never going to run out of love songs, right?
never, yeah.
It's fascinating that we are never, and if we create a new language, we'll have that whole experience all over again. We
Yeah.
will never run out of love songs. We will, and you see this especially in amongst film directors
Mm.
that when they direct movies, some of them just say the same story again and again in different movies. They're all a hit,
They
but it's
often
the same.
do.
It's the same point. Like you can take a
Meta
director.
narratives are often just the same thing. If you think of it, the meta
There's
narratives, meta
only
myths.
a handful of those, if you really think about it, right?
Yeah.
Love, death, loss, right? وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ. Right? You just have the same repetition, and it is remarkable what you're saying right there.
And
That
you have, I think it's Tolstoy who said that all great stories begin with one of two, that uh, a man sets off on a journey or a stranger comes to town. And and in essence, that there's like you could just group almost most spectacular events and narratives in just these two formats. It's yeah. Speaking of movies, and this is something you've had a great interest in, isn't it? Studying movies. यार
yes.
ये क्या हो रहा है? We also study movies. I'm also a movie critic. Talk to us, Sheikh. How did you find yourself in this very fortunate position? And what is this a thing where you study
Yeah.
movies?
I mean, film and filmmaking has been a huge part of my life always, and I got really into like taking it seriously. And amongst this journey, as Allah makes things happen, right? You go towards something and He starts opening doors.
Yeah,
They're
because
good for you.
you tie this into your Quran studies in a way, the whole this whole kind of experience. So yeah, what's going on here?
I as I got into studying film, when you start studying it, anyone who has, they look up thousands of screenwriting books and how to write a story. There's Joseph Campbell's, Hero's Journey,
Yeah,
like, and there's all of these things. And then I came across this one teacher. He has this book. He helped out in Pixar, Toy Story, all of those, and he helped them out. Story consultant. His name is Brian McDonald. Highly suggest for people to search him up. And he has, and I began like this apprenticeship under him where he made me go through classic films to really see what's happening. And he also has a book called The Golden Theme, where he
okay.
talks about, that there's this all great stories have this golden theme within it, which is that the whole concept of good and evil, right? So usually
Mm,
every story, and then he took us through, how every story is this, beginning, middle, and end, and to leading up to a point. And going through those classic films, like we're starting from 1940s, 1950s, the black and white era, and you start noticing that when they're, especially this era, this is pre-film school, by the way. This is when film school was not invented, so we were just discovering the camera in the world.
right.
So these people are just coming off from oral tradition, right? You have the stage and oral tradition, and they just got the camera. So right now, it's not about cinematics. It's not about any of that. It's just about telling a story. And the story that you have these people telling, like you have Billy Wilder, you have Rod Serling, the guy who wrote Twilight Zone, Planet of the Apes, right? And you have these people telling these stories, and the people inspired by that generation are pretty much telling stories of the power of truth and the horrors of falsehood. Right? You take a
Okay.
story like Billy Wilder's really famous director. He wrote The Apartment and Sunset Boulevard. The stories that he's writing are all about selling your soul, the dangers of selling your soul to climb up the ladder. Yeah, Alfred Hitchcock was writing these movies about taking in staying wary of dangerous situations, bad company, and all of that. Right? You're going into Spielberg now comes in. He's just coming off of these people, and he's writing E.T., Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan. He's talking about, and you'll notice, and that's what I was mentioning. These directors write one thing. So Spielberg, if you look into Saving Private Ryan, and you look into Schindler's List, it's all that one concept, that one individual life matters, no matter what it is. Right? That's the point he's ending in Saving Private Ryan. The point he's ending in Schindler's List. And that thing is just so remarkable that this is one of, for me personally, it's one of my biggest proofs of God. It's the fact that stories have this ability that, transcending culture, time, and space, right? You can watch something like The Godfather, which is this Italian, mafia thing, right? And it's a story about this guy who's thinks he's better than his, he's not going to turn out like his family just because he's posh and proper.
Don
right?
Corleone.
And then he literally tells him, the beginning of the movie, he says to his girlfriend, right, that I'm not like my family, right? And then you go towards the end of the film, and he's worse than his family could ever be.
Yeah.
Right. So
but in that many ways, that is the repetitive narrative of life, isn't it? With everyone, the struggle and the people are almost doomed to be caught up in what they forever are trying to escape. They become the very monster that they, that same theme that you see when you become the very thing that you are trying to be weary of. You become the villain. It's like
and these are a set of tragedy stories that are so chilling. It's terrifying, and these directors throughout different religions and cultures have dealt with these very topics, like topics of going down a wrong path and going down a right path. And it's just, and we've been doing it, and we're going to continue doing it. And the fact that that's going to stay, it's such a uniting factor, right? Like, you can have a film that's written in a different language, and your heart can connect to it.
Yeah,
that says a lot about us.
But the theme is fundamentally just very. It is a very traditional and common theme. Ultimately, that they don't really, these meta themes, if I mean by that, not the actual theme, the meta theme, that they're just very, they're pretty much just a few. Obviously,
in Surah Shu'ara, right? It's fascinating. It's a fascinating surah because in Surah Shu'ara, Allah does this pattern where he's having the story of Musa, the story of Adam, and then the story of Nuh, the story of Lut, Shu'aib, and he's doing this, and there's this pattern that he keeps repeating, right? That we send them their brother Nuh, and he said, fear God, and they say no. And then inna fi dhalika al-ayah wa ma kana aktharu mu'minin wa inna rabbaka lahu al-azizur rahim. Then we send them their brother Lut, and he said, fear God, and they didn't. Inna fi dhalika al-ayah wa ma kana aktharu mu'minin wa inna rabbaka lahu al-azizur rahim. And he does that 4 or 5 times, right? And then he ends that surah, and he says, look at the Shu'ara, right? They venture into every valley. And it's remarkable he does that. He doesn't need to do that. I'm just gonna keep saying.
Tell what do you see in that? Like, as in what that the kind of juxtaposition of these narratives of the Anbiya coming down, and really the theme being quite just being similar, really, repetitive, and then suddenly being juxtaposed, verbatim, in fact, and seeing the Shu'ara that أنهم في كل واد يهيمون, that أنهم يقولون ما لا يفعلون, and that these shu'ara. Tell us, what's the what leaps straight out at you with that?
This surah, I think, especially being into the arts, and for anyone who's an artist or aspiring artist, this surah is a must read for what Allah and His relationship with art, I think, because there is this repetition that Allah is doing throughout the entire surah, in which it's like we were just talking about the directors and right, that there's one. So truth is not different every other day, right? Truth is going to be consistent throughout. It's going to be an axiom, so it's going to be singular.
Yeah.
And when he goes towards the end and he talks about, have you not seen the shu'ara, right? Like what those, he's saying that the Quraysh and the rest, they say that he's having, jinns descend down and he's having, but he's like, compare this poetry that you're saying, compare that to your poetry. Look how you trying to be, shock culture or whatever. You're going into a lot of people have interpreted what that means. It's a very interesting phrasing, right? It can go
Yeah.
many ways, but from a
Yeah.
physical point of view, that you do not see them go into every valley, right?
And that they are
Clearly,
lost,
they are
in
lost,
these valleys.
and they're lost in these valleys. And you see that to get ahead, especially in the arts, you do have to do something shocking, right? You have to
Yeah.
do something shocking. And he says, and then he ends off. It doesn't end with that ayah. It then ends off with saying, "Except those who believe and they do good, and Allah is happy with them." He's putting an exception to the shu'ara, that those who believe, they're going to be straight and consistent, which
No.
is amazing, because
Yeah.
there's a canvas of creativity
Yeah.
within good. Not only does it work always, right? It's endless. Like what we
Yeah.
were talking about, like love songs,
Yeah.
which is a very beautiful emotion. We're never gonna run out of it. That's
Yeah, because these poets, you see, Allah is saying that they are, they are bewildered, beguiled, wandering, lost, confused in every valley that you can imagine. وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ. You
yeah,
attribute this azama, this greatness to them, that they, have countless stanza and lines dedicated to, oh, I was in this battlefield, abe isko, I was
yeah,
cutting this guy down, my spear was
yeah.
like this, my sword was like, abe, yeah, they weren't even doing that. It's like
There's that thing about Ice Cube. I think he has straight out of Compton, right? And then you look into it, and he goes to private school, right? He starts off as when he was growing up. So it's like you have the thing that you're saying is not matching up with what it
Yeah,
is.
because and I remember there was this thing once with there was an example of I think Obama, where him and his was it Michelle, they had this photo, but it was taken with almost this somewhat of an impoverished backdrop, and it
Yeah,
gave just the I don't know whether it was the filter or the actual thing, but gave this impression, since it was a younger photo, almost to allude to that they grew up in
yeah,
impoverished backgrounds without saying it. And people are like, oh wow, these the black struggle and these people, and then there was these articles saying, look, let's just remind you, these people had an absolute distinguished upbringing, very a crazy education, and they don't really identify. Obama doesn't identify with the struggle of the regular folk out there, but just it's this same thing of what imagery can do to people. It speaks, thousands of words. That these poets who are saying all this stuff, um, and but not to just not to say that there's no khair in these things, like you said, that, but there are people, there are people that do, they amilu salihat, that they do good, that there are people that inspire, that motivate, that, it's not to say that, because some people understood from this that, oh, shi'r in Arabic or in Islam is a
yeah,
negative thing, or that that this is something evil, almost like poetry. It's something, and that's
yeah,
entirely not true, because the Prophet himself said that, inna min ash-shi'ri la hikmah, that there is profound wisdom that comes from poetry. And uh, in Sahih Bukhari, you have a hadith that they would often sit in the Masjid al-Nabawi right throughout the night, just yatadhakarun, just going through the poetry of Jahiliyyah and just taking its lutf and enjoying and
yeah.
having that experience. And uh, so it's not a, and the Prophet,
So
yeah, yeah,
in
yeah,
that verse that you said, right, where وَالشُّعَرَاءُ يَتَّبِعُهُمُ الْغَاوُونَ أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَهِيمُونَ وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ. And then it goes illa alladhina,
Yeah.
except the ones, right? It's not inna alladhina. It's not like
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
starting a new discussion
No,
about.
of course
It's like
not.
he's
Yeah.
talking about the shu'ara, and then he's going in the exception that not all of them, right? He did like we talked about when he was doing with the Ahlul Kitab. Not all of them, right?
Yeah.
He does this thing often where he's saying, reminding us of the axioms that is important that to him, which is not that the shi'r is wrong, but
But
it's
it's
that
just
when you're
that
not have
the gravitas of the subject is something else. It is right now
yeah,
we are speaking of revelation, we are speaking of existential
right,
crises, we are speaking of it's not it's just that it's like saying, yeah, this is not the time. It's not that poetry doesn't have good in it, but this
yeah,
is not the time. Don't compare that to what we're talking about.
yeah,
This is something so immensely spectacular and majestic. Sure, that is, don't forget those are people that misuse that just build a
yeah,
false legacy. They create wars with it. They just boast with it. There's just and they spread all these tales, spread all these romances with it, which are not, the taghazzul and the tashabbub of whether it's going to be Imra al-Qais saying, I had this
yeah,
woman on that night and that woman on that night, and then I had a group of these women that were by the lake, and his famous mu'allaqa. And so it's
yeah,
it's like these people, don't compare. Right now, the topic is serious. We're talking about
yeah,
revelation. Yeah. Wow. So I see that, this is a rather fascinating mix, this whole thing. Your insight, having been somebody that has keenly studied films, cinematic kind of experience, classical movies. And then with that insight, also having studied the Deen, studying Islam, studying the Quran, whilst you were studying, and this isn't just exclusive to whilst you were studying, it could
yeah.
include right now and even in your teaching. What are some challenging topics that you feel, yeah, so some things that uh have kind of you've had to grapple with, or maybe are still grappling with, or maybe did in the past with this. Yeah, that would be interesting to know.
Whilst going through the Quran, studying the Quran, teaching the Quran, you're saying, right?
Yeah, like your
Or
whole journey, because you come at it from a different angle. You're obviously somebody very focused on the centrality of the Quran. You teach you have institutes that you've set up online. You're teaching,
yeah,
you're analyzing the themes, the meta themes of the Quran, and then you've got contemporary, back and forth. Are there certain topics, certain themes that you find really and it doesn't have to mean that you're still grappling with them, or you find that maybe
yeah,
but you see these as grappling themes and topics in relation to the Quran.
yeah. I mean, one thing, and I mean, going off just film, right?
Yeah.
When you have, like, I was talking about these few names. I was talking about Rod Serling, Billy Wilder, that era. It's around the 1950s era. These are directors that are coming back from World War II. They've seen death in the face. They've seen death all around them. There's this proximity to the purpose of life, as you can say, right? And just seeing, like, if anyone sees Twilight Zone, they'll see that this is directed by a man who's really come close to face with the reality of life, right? That we're all going to die, and how we're dealing with it, and our kindness to each other. You start seeing this in there. Later on, obviously, as our distance from death, then our movies become more convoluted. They become no point. They become just like abstract. But in that era, it wasn't abstract. They all knew what they had to say. They all knew that, be kind to each other, be gentle, and don't sell your soul. Be careful. All of these things, they're really real.
You're
And noticing all of this.
you're describing them as you would feel a spiritual experience. Would I say that?
Yes,
Or
yes,
yeah. Hmm.
yes. And that's where it becomes really interesting, right? When Allah saying, قُلِ ادْعُوا اللَّهَ أَوِ ادْعُوا الرَّحْمَنَ أَيَّمَّا تَدْعُوا فَلَهُ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى. Whatever you call him by, the best names belong to him, right? And you start really noticing that amongst the world. And that's one thing that has really been surprising about the Quran to me, which has been that, this Allah is not this Arab God, for us. There is this godly experience that people are having all throughout. They're having all throughout. Then what is it about this book? What is becoming that? Like as you said, وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ, right? That when they hear the Rasul, their tears flow. But what is it that's becoming a barrier for the vast majority of people? That the whole idea that Allah is saying, right? هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. What you just said right now, where these directors are feeling this thing, that could be, as he's saying, guidance for those that have taqwa. Now, taqwa is outside of the Quran. We know that very clear, that taqwa, this experience of taqwa, of God consciousness, exists outside of this book. I mean, if the beginning chapter is saying this is guidance for those who have taqwa, the assumption is you already have it, and now you're coming to this book, right? And
it's not saying in that particular verse that it's not specifying hudal lil muslimin.
Yeah, it's not.
It's leaving it to, you approach this, whoever comes biqalbin salim, whoever comes with that heart and mind of that consciousness, that mindfulness, they will find in it guidance.
Yeah. And I mean, even if you go to that famous verse that we always cut, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. We stop it there. But that's not where the verse ends. It's ولو آمن أهل الكتاب لكان خيرا لهم منهم المؤمنين. Which is remarkable, because explicitly in his words, it does seem like he's saying that from amongst them are those that have iman. It would be better if they become Muhammadan, right? If they become into this new era, which is, it's remarkable because the way Allah talks about the outside world is very different than what we often talk about. And you treat people differently, I guess. And this is one thing that I've discovered. You treat people differently if you think they have a chance of getting into heaven.
Yeah, I was just seeing, is there a little lag here? I hope there isn't, but I was just seeing on, as you were responding, I'm just going to press refresh here whilst we're doing that. So should
I hope they cut the rest.
No, just 1 second. I'm just going to click refresh, people, so as to ensure that the Shaykh is not buffering. Right, 1 second. And that's right, brought us right back. So, yeah, you were saying, Sheikh. So, okay, wow, I see. And you were mentioning certain things that. Do you find any people presenting any topics as and they could be, I mean, it could be from whether it's contemporary issues or other things that, or maybe it's not, maybe it's a perspective that are certain themes to grapple with. As an example, I've had people, I know this is an old discussion, question a metaphor within the Quran. Now, that's sure, but not just in the sense, just actual metaphor, the presence of metaphor, not in the sense of tashabuhat. Sure, I mean, one could interpret the verse to mean that way, but just metaphor. And some people have found, so there are certain understandings that so there were certain people traditionally that felt there was no metaphor in the Quran. And I believe that if I recall correctly, I think Ibn Taymiyyah tried to argue in that direction. And I believe Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah may have tried to support him. And I think to some extent, Uh, many of the Salafiyah leaned that way
Yeah.
in feeling that the Quran does not have or should not really have much metaphor. But I feel that, you see, metaphor is, it's so, like it's in a complex manner, it is so bound into language and human
Yeah.
consciousness.
You can't even take it out.
Yeah, because you couldn't, um, like if you just think of language itself, we wouldn't be able to communicate without metaphor. It is so intrinsic, and the fact that we pick it up so naturally, uh, and it doesn't just stop there. You see, because metaphor, I speak of our relationship to God as well by metaphor. So as to say, well, so for example, God is light, God is love. That inna Allah
Hmm.
yuhib, inna Allah
Yeah.
jameel. Allah is
Yeah.
beauty. Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. He is light. That these are very profound uh, avenues by which we connect to Allah. We take the meaning of the Quran. It always, it continues to strike us with new perspectives, to with by adding things to our daily lives, to adding things to our fresh experiences as we recite the Quran. This is often done by metaphor. And the reason I find this really fascinating is I contrast this with, I'm not sure if you're familiar with in Lacanian psychology, they have this understanding of metonymy. And metonymy is taken from linguistics in the sense that you have certain, I guess it could be ironically seen as a ism of majaz. It is where something is associated with something, but it's not actually of the thing. And often an example is like saying the crown in reference to the king or the
Yeah.
monarch, or the
Yeah.
pen in reference to the scholar. And often, because something is placed with it by association,
Yeah.
it carries this. Like almost substitution or this connection with it. So people often their relationship with God is a metonymical one, that they see that they are, so for example, that their relationship to God is by his laws, it is by his rituals, it is by his commandments, it is by his ahkam, it is by the fiqh that we worship him by, it is
Yeah.
by these. So these are the this is how we bind ourselves to God. We connect ourselves through a metonymical, through a metonymic procedure or a metonymic bond. Now that's one way, but the other way is by metaphor, in trying to understand God as Allah is light, Allah is love, Allah is. These things are not, your relationship to God is not. I'm not. I'm not trying to disparage or belittle, but it's greater than just it's his laws. His as great as they are, as great as his worship is, his rituals are. It's to him through his
Yeah.
asma, through his mercy, his
Yeah.
compassion, he is knowledge, he's all of these things. It gives I feel that these things can often draw, like people can find, even though they're ultimately it's a path to God, but people can find themselves sometimes. So let's say they're taking a metonymic path. The reason I'm saying this is uh, they can sometimes inadvertently, maybe, so to speak, that miss the trees for the woods, almost in miss the. So people get so caught up and in
Yeah.
the the fiqh or in the ahkam or in the rituals, so as to take them to be the ultimate goal in and of themselves. And as great and spectacular as they are, and they are from Allah, but Allah is much greater than these ahkam. They are not the end. So you find people often getting plagued by waswasa, getting plagued by OCD, getting plagued by. I was speaking to just somebody yesterday, my a client in my Patreon kind of session, that who had almost a spiritual Tourette's, where he would at times feel that he's blasphemed. Like did I say, now I need to say astaghfar, I need to say astaghfar, I need to say astaghfar. Or people would feel that I've not, this salah is not being done in this way, or this wudu is not being, they are being plagued by the rituals, because their connection to God is not one through metaphor, it is one through metonymy, it is one through.
And I think it's fascinating that you brought that up, because going back to what we were talking about, the difference between the Torah as it is, right, Old Testament, New Testament, Quran, it seems like, if you want to be in that route, you could just focus on Leviticus only, right? In the Bible, you can just focus on that. And if you want
so it should have come through. Right, okay, it's coming through as it's coming through now as a good connection. So right, yeah, so we is back, people. So sorry, coming back to with a slight interruption there, but you were speaking about you went forward from the whole concept of metaphor and art, and then you went into your explanation. Yep, you were saying, sorry,
I was
Sheikh.
saying that if someone wants to have that, just like, kitab or ruling parts, you could just focus on the Leviticus, the Old Testament Torah part, and you can leave that out. You can read, because the Bible is sequential in the sense that here's the laws, and then here's the history, and then here's the the stories. And the Quran is very different in the sense that it's sort of forcing you to go, like, to be, like, you have to go through the metaphor to even learn your fiqh, and then you have to, while in the midst of your metaphor, you're also learning your fiqh. It's like these two things are gelled in, right? So, like, even if you take Genesis in the Bible, it begins literally when Allah creates the universe. But you take Surah Baqarah, and it is starting off with, it's not starting off with the Adam and Eve story. It's starting off with Allah having a separate discussion and then going in. It's as if he's forcing us to look at the metaphors, because that is how you will get to know God. Like, you have to look at it. And I think sometimes what happens is, when a person does not have this relationship with the Quran, am I dropping in? Dropping off?
No, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. I thought it was...
Yeah.
I'm saying that a person, when they don't have this relationship with the Quran, they are missing out on a lot of metaphors. So you can study the fiqh and know, the rulings, the general rulings of Islam. But when you miss out on the metaphors, and like you said, the metaphors are crucial in understanding Allah. And I think that is also what Jesus does when he comes to the people. He is speaking in metaphors.
Yeah.
Because he is like, you have all the laws. You guys, he literally says that I have not come to abolish the laws. You have them all, right?
Yeah,
you want the laws,
that's
you can study
amazing. Yeah, because
but I'm here to give you the metaphor.
Because Jesus is associated with metaphors, speaking in parables, speaking in these metaphorically, and he's thereby also associated with the ruh, the consciousness and the spirit, the reaffirming this bond of I guess, metaphor and spirit. Yeah, I never
Yeah,
thought of
and that's
that
back to what
until you
you're
just said
saying.
it. Wow.
Back to what we're saying when Allah describes him. He says, يُعَلِّمُهُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَالتَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. Injil is coming with him, right?
Mhm.
But what was Tawrat? So like he's well versed in the laws, but now he has to go to these people who know the law really, really well. That here is who Allah is. Because sometimes, and it's remarkable when you're speaking about certain individuals, that we've always talked to, who do have this like religious OCD. There's that verse in the Quran where Allah says, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, right?
Yeah.
And that line is such a remarkable line because that line can seem taboo to say in a saintly point of view because you're like, oh, no matter what happens, I'm going to have ultimate taqwa. And here Allah is saying, have taqwa as much as you can have,
Yeah.
right? And that is such a crucial piece in understanding Allah. Like, what do you think? Like, taking that piece
Yeah.
out,
Because
how do you think that will
no,
impact your religious
I,
understanding?
I love what you're saying. If you think about it, you take the ahkam or the ayatul ahkam, even
Yeah,
the example you gave of Leviticus, one could take the verses of the ahkam and whether they are popularly given as just 500 verses of the Quran.
yeah,
As many of the Mufassirin will say, and you'll see Ibn Arabi and others speak about these, the Ayat al Ahkam, and some reducing them, like Maqatil ibn Sulaiman, reducing it to, I think, something like 100 and whether it's between 130 to 150 verses only of the Quran. But even if you go with this 500 number, of 6,200 plus verses of the Quran, which are non
yeah.
uh, law centered, that the bulk of the Quran, what is it evoking in you? What is it? It's all, if it's not law, it's about that experience, isn't the spiritual experience? It's like nourishing that consciousness. So yeah, when you were saying that, I was thinking, yeah, you've also, it just occurred to me. I thought, yeah,
Which is, and even if you take like, it's really cool. You take the beginning and the ending of the Quran, right? It's like we ask for hidayah. If you're going from the point of view that the Quran is one coherent piece, you're starting off, oh, Allah gave us hidayah. He says, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, right? Here it is. And you go through this entire thing, and at the end, we're still like, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ. Like we're
that's
okay, you gave
amazing.
it to us, but I still can't do it. Which is,
Yeah.
it's amazing because if you look at that Adam and Iblis story, right? It
Mhm.
is just that thing. You have this being, Iblis, he wants to be perfect. So his attack at being perfect, he's in competition with God, right? So when he messes up, he's like, wait, I messed up. I can't mess up. I'm perfect. That means you must have messed up. So one of us must have messed up. I can't mess up, so it's you, right? And as
That's
opposed to
amazing. Yeah.
the story of Adam, where he's like, yeah, no, I messed up.
Because symbolically, this coming back to this metaphor, symbolically, the lesson that that there is that imperfection in a way is perfection, that it
Yeah,
is, and trying to seek perfection in and of itself would be an imperfection.
because you're trying to be God.
Yeah, and you can't be. It's that it's well,
Remarkable. It's remarkable. And the ayah where he says, وَمَنْ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, which I think is one of the most remarkable verses, right? Who can forgive except Allah? Because it's like, and I think that's the crucial human, piece. Like if you like look at the Habil Qabil story, it's so
okay.
amazingly done because he's like he gets rid of his brother, but then he's dying inside, and Allah saying, who can get rid of that?
Mm.
And ultimately, like you go through the Quran, he's giving you all of this, but at the same time, he's saying, yeah, but you're still my ghulam, you're still my servant. Like
And
you're not gonna.
coming to the coherence part, you said that there's
Yeah.
between, let's say, in Fatiha, if you're taking it as we are beginning saying ihdina sirat al-mustaqim, and although
Yeah.
Allah is saying ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ, and there's هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, and the hidayah has begun, and we're going right through it, right till the end, and it's still, there's قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ, that you've got these shayateen min al-jinnati wan-nas and this waswas. But even in that, there is a sense of, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Because in a way, look, you will never be able to do it. I guess in like you have in the verse of saying of polygamy, that illam
Yeah.
ta'dilu wa lan ta'dilu,
You won't be able to.
you're never gonna categorically be able to do it. It's not.
Yeah.
But I guess it's in that human frailty is a beauty. Because it was always meant to be frail. It was always, there's
Yeah.
this there's this weakness that we will always have, but that weakness is a reminder of our dependence upon God. Because it's bound, isn't it? Because because it reminds us of the dependency.
Which it seems like when you go through the Quran, that is what he's ultimately looking for. He's looking for purity, right? وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ, right?
Yeah.
قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. He's looking for purity, but it seems like the ultimate form of purity that he's actually looking for is that initial Adam alayhi salam scene where it's like, without you, I'm done for.
And that Allah, He is al-Ghani wa antum al-fuqara.
Yeah.
But this is it, isn't it?
And it's amazing because Shaitan tries to knock that out, right? He tries to knock out, he tries to knock out hope. He tries to knock out hope and fear, which Allah says in Surah Sajda, khawfan wa tama'a, right? Have both of these things. But he tries, because if you knock out one of them, this is one thing I've been obsessing over these past few months, is this idea of, alhamdulillah and istighfar. Shaitan in one way or another wants to knock out one of these, because you knock out one of them and then you have the line in your head, right? If I remove your hamd, then you will say kuch nahi hota, kuch nahi hoga, nothing will happen, right? If I remove your istighfar, you will say kuch nahi hoga. Either way, it's the same thing. Like take Sulaiman and Ayub, right? Yeah. When he says ni'mal abd innahu awwab, they keep returning back. Sulaiman he has everything, he has this thing.
Yeah, but he is trying to, you see, in a way that what it's reminding you that you are that faqr is trying to be displaced or replaced with a faqr of the dunya. The shaitan, that he will intimidate you with a faqr. Yeah. But this is a different faqr, because if you think about it, there is an impoverishment, which is our impoverishment, because there is a reliance on God. And that is a beauty, because that is a dependency that actually empowers us. But it could be replaced with an impoverishment of the dunya. The thought of, oh my God, of this faqr. This is a different faqr. This poverty, the one that Allah says the shaitan is intimidating you by.
Yeah.
He's replacing the equation using the same tool, but the one that has beauty, he's replacing it with a dunyawi faqr, which is a negative. It's not a positive, because that it plagues us.
It's the same thing he does to Adam, right? He says to Adam, shajarat al-khuld, don't you want to live forever?
Yeah, the dependency is being knocked out.
Yeah, on God.
Yeah, because
that's it.
And in a metaphorical sense, one could say that the shaitan is refusing, as some mystics have said, that he's refusing to bow down to Adam in an objection that he's not worthy. That in a way that returning to this pristine, some people say he was that I only bow down to God. in a way that, that there is this, that this nature should be absolute,
Yeah.
not
Yes.
weak. And
Yes.
we are, some mystics say that Shaitan was beguiled by his tawheed, in the sense that he was such a, I don't bow down, that I am so firm in my existence
Hmm.
that I bow down to God, but I don't bow down to anybody else, thereby forgetting that this is this is the this is the guidance from God, as in, this is, in this frailty there is a beauty, in this
Yes.
dependence there is independence. But he's beguiled that no, that it should be so perfect forever. It should be,
Yeah.
that some mystics explain it like this, and that's an amazing taste to it as well.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting because our relationship with people, especially when we get into Deen, is often looking for God within people, right? We're looking for that perfection within people.
Yeah, and you never find it. You will but only find shortcomings with people.
There is this there's this film which I always recommend to people, and if you could ever check it out too, it's called Amadeus.
What's
It's called Amadeus. It's a rare film. It won a lot of
Amadeus?
awards. It's amazing
Amadeus.
about this point. It's you have Mozart,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? So the story is loosely fictional, but you had this guy named Salieri who was a composer. He was the king's composer. He was the best, right? He was the king's composer, and he had given his life to chastity. He had given it to all for one thing. He said, I pray to God that I will give myself to you. You make me the best composer in the world, right? You let me do your music, and I give myself to you. Got it? That's how the movie begins.
Yeah.
Then you have this, and he's doing this thing, and then there's a sound of a child prodigy, right? He comes in. This is like this teenage kid, behaya, nothing, just loose with the girls, everything, right? Loose language, laughing out trail. But when he plays the piano, this is Mozart now.
Mhm.
When Amadeus, when he plays it, it's amazing. Like it's clearly better than Salieri's. And this
Wow.
whole movie is about how this guy ends up in the mental hospital because he is like, I was chased to God. He was gonna give me. We had a deal. I was gonna be chased, and he was gonna give me. But he get instead. And there's this famous scene in the movie where he, basically throws the cross, and he says, you gave the thing that you're supposed to give me, the perfect, right? But you gave it to this messed up kid, and it's just
Mm.
an amazing, like portrayal of the shaitanic phenomenon, right?
Wow. And here's a thought, Sheikh. There's something in psychology. It's especially in something known as archetypal psychology,
Uh-huh.
with people like James Hillman, who speak of, and he's influenced by people like Carl Jung and others as well, and so a bit of Corban, and but so this is how we often see things. That, let's say you've got a child, and this child is now, I don't know, he's shy, he's timid, and people will say, well, or he's, as you mentioned with Mozart, he's completely unbefitting, but then he goes on to becoming something so spectacular, and people will say, well, many psychologists will say, well, it's natural. So Hillman gives the example of this great matador, this
Yeah.
bullfighter who, as a boy, he's very shy and timid of him, would do nothing but hide behind, as a boy, his
Mm.
mother's apron, because of the daunting future that awaits him. And in a way that the future is intricately causing the past. And it's so spectacular. I mean, I just find it like, as a thought, and you see, I wonder, I want to share this, that if one was to read some parts of even the stories in the Quran that you see, like the journey with Khidr, like we spoke of, Musa alayhi salam, where they are now building a wall for these little boys because of what will happen in the future, that the future is shaping their past. You see that the boys will grow up to do this. It's there's a cause and effect, but in reverse. But obviously, unbeknownst to people, like
Yeah.
we wouldn't see it. We would see the arrow of time going in this
Linear.
direction.
Yeah.
But what if, in a world, in a dimension where time is but irrelevant, that the causes lie in, in what is yet to come? That one could say the story of Musa alayhi salam being placed on this stream of water with turbulence to reflect this this greater turbulence that is yet to come in life. And there's just so many ways with so much majestic kind of poetic expressions of and manifestations within these verses and the narratives we're finding. But I it's just when you said Mozart and as a little boy the struggle, and one could say, well, that would be that you would do that. You would be completely bewildered if you knew the glory that was yet to come. Just almost a reverse directionality of cause and effect, but unbeknownst to us in this world. I just thought I'd you reminded me, so I thought I'd share that. But wow, that is,
which is a really, I mean, you have to have further thought into thinking that, right? It is it's a practice in seeing the unseen, of seeing far away, which I think is what Shaitan, as you were saying, Iblis comes in and he blocks. You're peeking into the unseen.
Yeah. I mean, one could say, you could see verses that we are the verse that we are somehow extracted spiritually or by consciousness and manifested. أخرجكم من ظهور, that we are taken out of Adam and we exist. And certain things happen. Amongst them, Allah says, "Alastu bi rabbikum?" قالوا بلى. That you say, "Inna kunna an hadha ghafilin." Allah, but we are ghafil, you see. But it's just that we're not. You see, in a way, what if we are seeing, that there are certain realities, but playing backwards? That you have, there's this hadith that, and it's questioned. I'm sure there's discussions around its isnad, but there's this hadith that Adam sees into the future. He sees all. You see, he sees what will be of his progeny. He sees humanity. You see, because the irony is that he didn't know this shajaratul khuld, that eat from and have an eternality, but that eternality was humanity was his legacy. And he sees all of them, and it says he's so wowed by them. And he sees, in this particular hadith, it says he sees Dawood, and for some reason he's so infatuated with this this individual. He says, who's that? There's something about that. Say, oh, that is one of yours, this offspring, and his name is Dawood. And oh, really? How long will he live? And he says, well, he'll only get a certain time. Really, that it? And in this, and I see this as a metaphor once again, this beautiful tradition where he says, really, is that it? Give him some of my life. Yeah, look at the from an element of compassion and that the ultimate sacrifice, that you are giving away some of your very life to this offspring that you've never met, but you can see from the future that he exists, and you feel that, oh, his life is not enough. There's so much more for him to achieve. And in this story, it says in this hadith that He says, give him at least 40 years of my life. You know this? And it says that when the angel of death approaches Adam, yeah, honestly, it's a beautiful tradition from the lessons, the metaphorical lessons that one can take. That he says, but I've got time left. I've got at least another 40 years. And they say, no, but you gifted that to, and it says, Fajahada Adam. He says, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. It says, Fajahada Dhurriyatu, that his progeny also became one of denial. You know, it says he denied and his progeny therefore denied. That he says, I don't know what you're talking about. He says, why would I do something like that? It's amazing. This conflicted, you know, tabi'ah of insan is us. This is,
Do you
you know,
think? Do you see when you say see into the future? Do you, now that you're talking about it, and it's crossing my mind, would you say seeing into the future is a form of hope? Do you think hope and seeing into the future are these synonymous
wow.
terms? Because
Why not, Yar? Because I tell you,
hope is just a practice in seeing into the future, and that's why it's so dangerous to shaitan. Because what if God could forgive me? Right? What if life can get better?
yeah.
It defeats materialism immediately.
What if our souls, our consciousness is so, you see, we are told in a hadith that we are constantly so intertwined with an angelic realm, that there are so many angels at works, so to speak, that are there safeguarding us, protecting us, that they are, there's also muwakkal ma'ana, that there's let's say there's an angel whispering good, you know, that the good guiding us always, this kind of guardian angel and these things. What's fascinating, I'll tell you what's fascinating is, Henri Corbin, who studied a lot of and became a mystic within the Islam, or especially academically within the Islamic tradition, was so fond of the Islamic tradition, and especially Sheikh Sohrawardi, Shihabuddin Sohrawardi.
Mm-hmm.
And he has this whole thing on angelology, and he said, it caught my attention because he said angels in Christianity and Judaism are, he said, but angels in Islam are so fascinating. And you think, well, really, why? And he speaks of, what if there is a different realm in which these angels operate in ways that are so intricately bound with us, but we wouldn't understand. Like, what if our intuition are these intimations of angelic manifestations? What if our inspiration is this these gentle whispers? What if our great ideas are from this guidance that is coming to us? It's like, as Ghalib says, that he says in his poem that आते हैं, he says आते हैं गैब से ये मज़ामीन ख़याल में, that these topics, these come to me from the ghaib. Ghalib sarir khama nawai sarosh hai. That the sound that the pen makes is actually the whispering of angels to me. That this angelology, that what if that these things, in this sense, like you said, hope. What if hope is this kind of this angelic whisper that we carry with us, that metaphorically, so as to speak. I mean, I'm speaking in a realm of metaphor here as well, but there's that we don't, obviously we don't understand these things. We see them like in a way, and I was explaining this to somebody in a discussion yesterday as well. We're having this great discussion that what if, like, the way on a computer you have multiple programs running, but they're connected. That they could be connected, but when you're on one program, you don't, like, I could be typing something into into Excel, but it's also simultaneously appearing in Microsoft Word. And it could be like these things are connected, even if you don't see them, that there are that what we see in this realm, in this dimension, may but be a shadow of something from another dimension, just as the shadow on the ground in a 2D world is but the shade from it is but the shape of a different dimension, which is 3D and entirely different, and it's casting, it's creating this shadow, which in a 2D world is an entirely different manifestation. So these things, they they sometimes they make my thoughts wander.
Yeah. I think we talk about the mother of Musa, right? إن كادت لا تبدي به لولا ربطنا على قلبها. She would have basically lost it if we had not her
Allah.
together.
Yeah,
Right.
like that's
Which
a
I think
divine
summarizes a lot of
intervention.
what you're saying. And these are the metaphors that I think, whether you go into the nitty gritty of it, like you're, or you get into the simplistic, I think the metaphors, the power of these metaphors is that it lets you peer, and the metaphors give you hope, which in turn make you strong. I mean, it is remarkable, and something about, monotheism, and it always fascinates me that Christianity, the way that it spread, and Islam, the way that it spread, right? And I mean, Judaism is in that too, because it's spreading through Christianity, right? And what is in these books that let people who were in very impoverished situations, gave them strength? What is within it? And
Allah.
usually it's hope.
Yeah.
That spread like wildfire. That, I think there's this line from a film that when the little guy does big things when he doesn't know he's a little guy.
I like that. Yeah, it's true. And that is our perception to us, isn't it? We are often held back by our own mind, by our own limitations, that the greatest enemy is but the ego, the self. I'm just even in that very statement, that when he doesn't realize, but is it even a realization that he is a little guy? Because in essence, maybe he never was a little guy, but that was the perception superimposed on him of this dimension, of this realm.
And that's where I think the sajda comes in. And in all this entire context, the sajda becomes this incredible piece, right?
The sajda.
The sajda.
Yeah.
Right? In this entire conversation, we're like, I don't know. Let's go down. There's this, right? The simplistic nature of the sajda is just like, Allah's got me. You are literally closing your eyes to the world when you're in the sajda.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Honestly. Wow. The narrative, the archetypal narrative that one learns from of Adam, alayhi salam. It is so, honestly, it is one that I deeply love.
It's amazing. I think the last 3 khutbahs I did were just that scene, that I couldn't talk about anything more. It's just amazing.
What's that verse about Adam that we, فَلَمْ نَجِدْ لَهُ عَزْمًا, that we, about Adam, that we did try him, or we did, but we didn't find him one of determination, or we didn't find him. Right, let me just bring this up now. It's going to be on my mind. I think it's Surah Taha, is it? وَلَقَدْ أَهِدْنَا إِلَىٰ Adam. Isn't it that one right there? Let me see. Where is here it is. Yeah, that's it. It's what's the verse number? It's Surah Taha 115. وَلَقَدْ أَهِدْنَا إِلَىٰ آدَمَ مِنْ قَبْلُ فَالنَّسِيَ. We took a deep covenant with Adam before, but he forgot. فَنَسِيَ وَلَمْ نَجِدْ لَهُ عَزْمًا. He didn't have we didn't find him of resolute determination, but he still was spectacularly great for who he was. And he was in his own imperfect way perfect.
Which makes you imagine we have that, blessed quality from Allah
Yeah.
bestowed upon us with other people. Imagine what they would do. That, oh, this guy sucks, but he still has maybe something in him.
It's true. It's true. We have that magic within us, that breath of God, as if it were, in us, that something magical about each and every one of us. And that verse, yeah. So this archetypal narrative that we find with the story of Adam, it is. I find it just so very dear to me. It really always just has me, because
Yeah.
there's just so many layers to it always. So
And that's, I think, going back and tying up what we were talking about throughout the whole session, which is that it's forcing you to go through this. You cannot skip. In the Quran, you can't skip this part, right? Like, you have to go through these stories to get to the fiqh. Which, by the time you get to the fiqh, how does that impact your fiqh?
Wow, you know what? Wow, seriously, I've really thoroughly enjoyed and loved this discussion, Sheikh. Just right from your journey into what inspired you about the Quran, going on to teaching the Quran, why the centrality of the Quran, the kind of difficulties that you found in society, or the challenges and the figures that inspired you, right into the themes and the nature of the Quran, like when Allah addresses, for example, Bani Israel as an example, a dialogical expression as a means to teach us, right through to the themes and the meta narratives that appear in life, and we also see reflected within the Quran, and how they can teach us, down to movies, and how even movies speak of these meta narratives, and then the concept of, which all tie into the deeper understanding of consciousness, of metaphor, sorry, which is so important. And whether it's art, movies, language, or whether it's the unconscious mind itself, or consciousness, coming right through to once again being this this speaking about why we maybe behave the way we do in our lives, whether it's going to be, as some people may say, what is cause and effect, or how is the ruh communicating? How are we communicating? How are we subliminally communicating? Is there inspiration? Is there hope? And these very things we find anchored in the Quran and the narrative. So just coming right back to that, just wow, I want to say shukran. It has
No,
been
thank you. It's been an
spectacularly
honor.
beautiful.
Yeah, finally made it happen, and it's worth it.
Honestly, I've loved it. I hope it's been of some meaning to people. It's sometimes it's like it comes back to that saying, I guess, of Jalaluddin al-Rumi, that you walk and the path appears. That
Yeah.
sometimes in just dialogical uh, communication in our dynamic, so many things unfold that we don't, um, it, and in that is a beauty, that it's not so premeditated, it's not so by design, it's just the organic kind of flow of it is mesmerizingly beautiful. So
Yeah.
shukran, I want to say to you, Sheikh, for really taking the time out, for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you for
Um,
having me, and shout out to Shafiq for introducing us both in this, and Jazakallah khair for having me. I'd love
right.
to
Yeah,
participate.
Shafiq. There, look, Shafiq just made a comment. Is that Shafiq or is that another Shafiq? But either way, shukran. I was encouraged by Shafiq and reminded that, why have you not got this mind trap yet with Shaykh Nabeel? And I was like, damn, I got to make that happen. There was a bunch of stuff going on over the new year, the Christmas holidays, the new year, some travel, different places, going to Pakistan, coming back. But Alhamdulillah, I'm really glad we did this. Um, it's 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 the beginning of inshallah many more to come.
Inshallah.
So shukran.
Jazakallah
Before
khair.
we wrap up, people who want to connect to you, what would you advise?
Um,
Take it away. Mhm.
you can find me on iqra.life. That's usually the easiest way. Or you can email me, Nabeel@iqra.life.
There you go, people. Nabeel at ikra.live. And I will share some of the websites. Your website is also natadarrab with a double R, natadarrab.com, where you speak about your courses, your kind of your motivation to inspire people about really the sanctity of the Quran, its centrality, its guidance, its just its beauty. So you've got that. You've got a few websites, haven't you? I think
Yeah.
one is Zenless, was it?
Yeah.
Zenless. I thought, wow, what a
That's
name.
just dealing with philosophies,
All right.
Western philosophies, Eastern
Oh
philosophies.
wow, we should have brought that into that's in another discussion. We're going to speak a
That's
lot about that. Yeah. So, have you got one on movies?
I do actually.
Oh,
That's
you
another
do?
one.
Wow. What's that called?
So anytime that I have an obsession with a subject, I end up making a whole platform for it.
Wow.
Share the khair.
So basically, I've got to get you to become obsessed with me and my work, and then you will set up the platform for it. Is that what you?
I actually had one for you a while back.
No
I actually had
way.
one for you a while back.
No way.
Just for
Allah bless you always. People, I want to say shukran to you all. May Allah bless you all for really taking the time out, being with us, just really being on this this journey of this conversation tonight. If you wanna do leave your thoughts in the comments in the comment section, how if there's maybe some follow-up, some thoughts, some ideas, just how you felt about the video. Definitely, I do try to read through some of the comments and just see how you guys felt about that. And yeah, just much love to all of you. If you do want to reach out to the Sheikh, I will leave his website once again in the description. If you want to reach out to me, then you definitely follow my YouTube, Instagram, and for more direct contact or one-to-one consultations, you can go to patreon.com/MALM, and you can just subscribe there, and I've got a Discord as well, and you can connect to that as well. Are you on Patreon, Sheikh?
I am not.
You're not, but you are in spirit. Allah. Guys, have a spectacular evening wherever you are. Allah bless you all and may keep you all always smiling. Salaam Allahi alaikum wa khuda hafiz.